Imagine rolling into your driveway after an exhausting 14-hour workday, one of those brutal Tuesdays where Murphy's Law strikes every single assignment with unexpected disasters. All I wanted was a cold beer and to sink into my couch. Instead, I found my wife Jennifer positioned on our front steps, her arms folded and wearing an expression that could sour fresh cream. Standing behind her, our 17-year-old son Marcus was trembling with barely contained fury. The driveway itself told the most shocking story. It was completely, disturbingly vacant. My emerald green Lamborghini Huracan, Jennifer's pristine black BMW X5 that she treasured like a family heirloom, and Marcus's beloved oversized Chevy Silverado that he'd worked 3 summers to afford, had all disappeared as if supernatural forces had whisked them away. "They hauled them off," Jennifer announced, her tone strained and bitter. "Every single one. Patricia Williams ordered them all removed." Patricia Williams, our Homeowners Association chairwoman, a person whose commitment to bland uniformity and rigid enforcement of petty rules had become neighborhood folklore. Someone I was starting to realize possessed a particularly toxic form of personal hatred toward anyone who refused to grovel before her suburban dictatorship vision. Leave your thoughts below. Tell me your location, because you won't believe the insane journey this towing situation led us down. This tale involves arrogance, shocking boldness, and the delicious irony of a villain engineering their own destruction. Meanwhile, I accidentally profited from their campaign of madness. Things get wild, so hold on tight. Before you assume I'm some wealthy show-off displaying my riches, let me explain our situation. I work as a systems engineer, focusing on intricate supply chain management, while Jennifer practices residential architecture. We've achieved success through dedication and countless sleepless nights developing our careers, plus several side ventures. One business, quite ironically as you'll learn, happens to be a regional vehicle recovery service I jointly operate with my former college buddy Rick. The Lamborghini represented a dream purchase, an absurd, impractical fantasy I'd pursued for years, typically stored under protective covering in our garage. The BMW served as Jennifer's everyday transportation, carefully maintained, while the Silverado belonged to Marcus, positioned perfectly and never once dripping fluid onto our spotless pavement. Our residents sat in an attractive yet overly controlled community named Maple Ridge Estates, which under Patricia's authority resembled more of a correctional facility for supposed visual violations. Patricia operated a flawless, almost disturbingly polished white Cadillac Escalade that proclaimed authority and judgment. Her steel-grey hair formed an impenetrable fortress that appeared to mock physics, complemented by constantly pinched features, as though permanently tasting bitter disappointment with humanity. Our earlier encounters remain minor but revealing. A harshly written memo regarding our mailbox post colour being allegedly non-conforming. A snide remark near the community swimming area about Marcus's stereo volume disturbing peaceful weekend mornings. Standard harassment tactics from these petty tyrants. However, removing all 3 vehicles represented an official war declaration. Jennifer described how Patricia had appeared that afternoon, accompanied by a tow truck I dimly recalled belonging to Summit Recovery, among the area's larger operations. She'd clutched a bundle of documents, supposedly infraction notices, alleging improper vehicle positioning. My Lamborghini's front wheel purportedly crossed the lawn boundary by mere inches. Completely false. Jennifer's BMW apparently obstructed some emergency access corridor that existed on no municipal blueprint I'd ever examined. As someone who designs site layouts professionally, I've reviewed plenty. Marcus's Silverado supposedly violated some newly invented regulation about oversized vehicle driveway parking visible from public streets exceeding 6 hours, something she'd obviously fabricated instantly. Marcus, bless him, had attempted reasoning, displaying survey stakes proving the Lamborghini sat on our land, and noting the BMW occupied the exact spot Patricia had previously praised Jennifer for choosing. Patricia, according to Jennifer, had merely grinned, a cold, predatory expression, before instructing the driver to proceed. She then presented Jennifer with a fee structure resembling extortion demands. $600 per vehicle removal, plus 85 daily storage costs and an additional $400 violation processing charge for each automobile payable directly to the association before release. Nearly $2,500 in immediate penalties plus over $1,000 in towing expenses, excluding accumulating storage fees. My temper ignited. This transcended rule enforcement. This was purely personal. A calculated power demonstration designed to maximize inconvenience and financial damage. My initial reaction was burning rage. I wanted to storm Patricia's immaculately groomed property and unleash my fury, probably using language violating numerous precious regulations. Then my analytical engineering mindset, the aspect that excels at deconstructing challenges and discovering optimal, often ruthlessly elegant solutions, engaged. Anger burns hot and chaotic. Methodical, calculated strategy, however, proves devastating. I dedicated that evening to consoling Jennifer and Marcus, promising resolution. Marcus feared Patricia might sell his truck for scrap metal. Jennifer worried about mounting expenses and blatant injustice. Internally, I was already calculating possibilities, an occupational habit from engineering experience. Always analyze the framework, identify pressure points. I guaranteed I'd resolve everything the following morning. My initial strategy seemed straightforward. Visit Summit Recovery, pay whatever ridiculous charges they demanded while filing protests, retrieve our vehicles, then systematically dismantle Patricia's miniature kingdom, beginning with thorough examination of association contracts, regulations, and finances, seeking inevitable procedural mistakes she'd certainly committed. This would exceed a simple disagreement. This would become a mission, an extremely gratifying, deeply personal mission. I had no idea Patricia, through her boundless arrogance, had just provided me the most perfectly ironic weapon to accomplish exactly that, a weapon I already half owned. Dawn was approaching on a very eventful day. The following morning, carrying a truly ridiculous amount of cash from the bank, suspecting Patricia and her chosen recovery service would reject credit cards allowing disputes, I drove my backup vehicle, an older but dependable pickup used for hauling, toward the address listed for Summit Recovery. Located in the industrial district, a vast yard containing a chaotic assortment of impounded vehicles in various conditions. Arriving, I mentally prepared calm but assertive demands to examine signed towing authorizations, specific regulation violations cited, and photographic evidence if available. I was gearing up for bureaucratic warfare. I entered the cramped, vinyl-floored office, prepared to confront an indifferent clerk, when my carefully maintained composure almost collapsed. Seated behind the desk, glancing up from paperwork with surprise, wasn't some random Summit Recovery employee. It was Linda, the sharp-eyed administrative manager from Tri-State Vehicle Recovery Services, the company I co-owned with Rick. For 10 full seconds, my mind refused processing this information. Linda, here. Then I noticed the logo on her uniform shirt, not Summit Recovery, but our company emblem. The documents she was organizing were our invoices, our impound paperwork. My thoughts raced. We maintained contracts with various municipalities, private properties, and indeed, some homeowner associations, but I never personally handled details regarding which specific association contracted with which regional office unless major problems developed. Rick managed most new client acquisitions, particularly smaller accounts like associations. Tom, Linda said, her expression bewildered. Why are you here? Forget your identification again? Her gaze then shifted past me toward the impound yard visible through the dirty window. A lot now containing, among other vehicles, one distinctly emerald green Lamborghini, a black BMW X5, and a massive Chevy Silverado. Her eyes returned to mine, understanding mixed with horror dawning across her features. Oh no, Mr. Patterson, those aren't yours, are they? I simply stared at her, then the lot, then back. A slow, disbelieving smile began spreading across my face. Impossible. Too perfect, too absolutely beautifully ironic. Patricia Williams, in her crusade to punish me, had contracted my own vehicle recovery company to impound my own automobiles. The universe apparently possessed a twisted sense of humor. Linda, I said, attempting to suppress the tremor of delighted amazement in my voice, could you access the Maple Ridge Estates account, and perhaps yesterday afternoon's service records? Linda, appearing like she'd witnessed a phantom operating a tow truck, nervously typed on her keyboard. Several clicks later her complexion paled. Tom, she whispered, the work order originated from Patricia Williams. She authorized it personally. Priority service with emergency response surcharges included. I leaned against the counter. waves of euphoric disbelief washing over me. The initial recovery fees alone, according to our premium association contract, a contract Rick had probably negotiated using our standard difficult client pricing due to their notorious lawsuit tendencies, would be substantial. Those fees would be billed directly to Maple Ridge Estates Association, who would then presumably charge me along with their fabricated penalties. This was magnificent. So, Linda, I said, attempting casual tone, what's the process for, hypothetically, the rightful owner retrieving these vehicles, assuming all association requirements are satisfied? She regarded me, recognition sparking in her eyes. Typically, the association sends release authorization once they've collected their administrative charges and fines. Then the vehicle owner pays our recovery and storage costs and retrieves their property. A scheme both devious and elegant began forming in my mind. And the association pays us for the initial recovery service on their monthly statement, correct? Linda nodded. Standard 30-day terms? This exceeded my wildest expectations. Excellent. Then, I said, producing my personal checkbook, let's begin with the Lamborghini. Patricia mentioned a $600 fine plus $400 violation processing fee payable to the association. Why don't I write Maple Ridge Estates a check for $1,000 immediately? Could you copy that check for our records before I personally deliver it to Mrs. Williams for the release? Linda's professional demeanor cracked, amusement playing across her lips. I believe that's manageable, Tom. And then there's our company's recovery fee for the Lamborghini. Let's see. Luxury vehicle, specialized handling, emergency response. That's $600. I grinned. Perfectly reasonable. I'll write a separate check to Tri-State Vehicle Recovery Services. I practically sang our company name. This transcended revenge. This was performance art. My first destination after retrieving the Lamborghini from my own company's lot, after dramatically inspecting it for non-existent damage, was Patricia Williams's residence. She occupied a slightly enlarged version of the standard neighborhood design. Her lawn displayed an almost supernaturally brilliant green, bordered with military precision. Her white Cadillac gleamed in the driveway. I pressed the doorbell, check for $1,000 clutched in my hand, carefully neutral expression fixed on my face. Patricia opened the door, her already suspicious eyes widening almost comically when she spotted the Lamborghini parked legally at the curb down the street. Mr. Patterson, she began, her voice dripping artificial sweetness. I assume you're here regarding outstanding violations and vehicle retrieval. Absolutely, Patricia, I replied, matching her tone. I have a check for $1,000 covering the prescribed fine and your processing fee for the Lamborghini. Upon receiving this, you'll provide necessary release authorization to, what was their name? Summit Recovery, correct? I watched her mental machinery grinding. She'd expected confrontation, arguments, desperate bargaining. She hadn't anticipated cheerful compliance and payment. Well, yes, she stammered, rhythm disrupted. That is standard procedure. She accepted the check, examining it as though it might explode. I ensured she noticed it came from my personal account. Wonderful. I'll wait while you complete the release form. I'm certain Summit Recovery wants to clear lot space. Her eyes flickered with something. Irritation, confusion. She clearly hadn't expected me to simply surrender and pay. She disappeared into her house, returning minutes later with a hastily scribbled note on association letterhead, authorizing one Lamborghini's release. The irony was so dense I could have served it for dinner. I thanked her effusively with exaggerated gratitude I hoped would irritate, then drove directly back to my impound facility. Linda waited, a knowing smile on her face. I handed her Patricia's note. One completed, I said. We repeated the process for Jennifer's BMW, another check to the association for their penalties. Another release note from an increasingly agitated Patricia, who had certainly seen the Lamborghini back in our driveway, and another recovery charge paid to Tri-State Vehicle Recovery Services. When I handed Patricia the BMW release check, I casually mentioned, these recovery companies demonstrate remarkable efficiency, almost as if they anticipated my arrival. Her eye twitched slightly. For Marcus's Silverado, I decided letting him handle the final transaction with Patricia under my supervision. Watching my 6'3" teenage son appearing completely unimpressed while presenting a check for his fine seemed to disturb Patricia even more. By midday, all three vehicles were home in our driveway. Jennifer remained furious but also mildly amused by the bizarre developments. Marcus was simply happy recovering his truck, and I was conducting a symphony of bureaucratic absurdity. The best part, Patricia was unknowingly paying my company to impound my own vehicles, while I simply recycled portions of that money back to the association as fines to maintain the charade. Rick, my business partner, called that afternoon. Linda had briefed him. After his laughter subsided, lasting 5 solid minutes, he said, "Tom, you magnificent genius. This is brilliant. What's the strategy? Continue impounding your cars and billing the association until they're bankrupt or you exhaust driveway space." "Something exactly like that, Rick," I replied. "Ensure those association invoices are itemized, detailed, and sent via certified delivery. We need clear documentation." The first round of impounds had cost the association $1,800 payable to my company. I had paid the association $3,000 in fabricated fines, but they now owed that $1,800. Patricia, in her blind fury, was effectively transferring association funds into my business accounts. The game had begun, and Patricia Williams had no idea she was playing against the house, and the house was me. I started installing additional security cameras around our property that evening, focusing on the driveway and street access points. Something suggested Patricia's campaign was far from finished, and her next move might be less official and more direct. I also began maintaining detailed records: times, dates, photographs of our legally parked vehicles, copies of Patricia's violation notices she'd foolishly left taped to our front door after the cars were impounded, copies of my checks to the association, copies of release forms, and naturally copies of Tri-State's invoices to the association. My engineering background valued comprehensive data, and I suspected this information would prove invaluable. The following weeks unfolded like a darkly comedic theatre production. As I'd predicted, Patricia didn't accept the swift return of our vehicles quietly. Instead, it seemed to intensify her irrational rage. 2 days after the initial triple impound, another notice appeared on our door. This time, the Lamborghini was cited for aesthetic non-compliance due to excessive paint vibrancy potentially distracting to motorists. I'm not exaggerating, those were the actual words. Reading it to Jennifer, we both erupted in laughter. It was so completely ridiculous it approached sublime. "Is she serious?" Jennifer gasped between giggles. "Apparently," I said, already calling my office. "Linda, it's Tom. We have a code green aesthetic violation. Prepare for incoming Lamborghini." Linda, now fully embracing the absurdity, simply sighed dramatically. "Consider it handled, boss. Same premium rate." "Naturally," I replied. So my brilliant green Lamborghini was once again ceremoniously loaded onto a tri-state flatbed, transported across town to our facility, while I appeared an hour later at Patricia's door, check in hand for the excessive vibrancy penalty, another $400 she'd invented from nothing. Obtain the release, drive to my facility, pay my company another $600 for the service, and bring the car home. Patricia's expression each time mixed disbelief, burning rage, and a growing, disturbing suspicion she couldn't quite articulate. She'd stare at the car, then me, then the car again, as if expecting it to reveal its secrets. I simply smiled pleasantly and thanked her for her dedication to community standards. Jennifer's BMW was next. Apparently, its tires were now insufficiently inflated by 3 psi, constituting a safety hazard, according to a notice accompanied by a blurry photograph clearly taken from across the street with telephoto lens capabilities. Never mind that Jennifer checked her tire pressure religiously. Another impound, another fine to the association, another payment to Tri-State, another bewildered Patricia. Then Marcus's Silverado. This time it was unauthorized commercial-grade vehicle dimensions, despite being a standard consumer model fitting perfectly within our driveway boundaries. Boundaries which, incidentally, I had resurveyed and marked with temporary paint for absolute certainty after the first incident. The violations became increasingly creative, increasingly desperate. My Lamborghini was ticketed for reflective glare creating potential aviation hazard, despite the nearest airport being 40 miles away, and nowhere near any flight paths over our neighborhood. Jennifer's BMW was cited because a fallen leaf from a neighbor's tree had landed on its roof, constituting failure to maintain vehicle cleanliness. Marcus's Silverado received a ticket for emitting intimidating auras. I'm completely serious about that last one. Emitting intimidating auras. I framed that particular notice.
Each time the process remained identical. Notification from Patricia. Phone call to Linda. My car gets impounded by my company. I appear at Patricia's residence, check in hand, feigning weary resignation. Oh, Patricia, not again. What is it this time? She thrust the violation at me, her voice tight with suppressed fury.
I'd examine it with furrowed brow, sigh dramatically, write the check, obtain the release, and retrieve my car from myself. The association's account with Tri-State was growing impressively. Rick reported that their treasurer, a nervous-appearing fellow named Harold, who always seemed to be perspiring, had called twice questioning the escalating invoices. Rick, playing his role perfectly, had been courteous but firm, explaining that Tri-State was simply fulfilling contractual obligations per the association president's directives. He'd even offered sending copies of Patricia's signed authorizations for each impound, an offer Harold had hastily declined, probably terrified of confronting Patricia.
Meanwhile, I was meticulous. Every interaction with Patricia was recorded on a small digital recorder I kept in my pocket. Single-party consent state, fortunately. My expanded security camera system, now featuring several high-definition night vision cameras, covered every angle of our property and substantial portions of the street.
I maintained a growing binder thicker than any engineering specification I'd ever written, filled with dated photographs of our perfectly parked cars, copies of the bogus violation notices, copies of my checks to the association which they were dutifully depositing, the release forms signed by Patricia, and crucially, the itemized invoices from Tri-State to Maple Ridge Estates Association, complete with delivery confirmation via certified mail. Each invoice clearly stated authorized by Patricia Williams, Association President. I also started attending monthly association meetings, something I'd previously avoided completely. I'd sit in back, listening politely as Patricia presented her carefully crafted version of community affairs. When the budget arose and Harold, the treasurer, would nervously mumble about unexpectedly high vehicle recovery expenditures, I would innocently raise my hand. "Ms. Williams?" I'd ask, my voice resonating with concern. "Are these vehicle recovery expenditures related to any specific recurring problems? Perhaps the board should investigate whether there's a systematic issue requiring attention, like unclear signage or ambiguous parking regulations. It just seems like a rather significant and rapidly growing expense category."
Patricia would glare at me, her face flushing deep red. "It is being addressed, Mr. Patterson," she'd snap, certain residents seem incapable of complying with clearly established community standards. Other residents would shift uncomfortably. A few bolder individuals, emboldened perhaps by my calm questioning or their own rising assessments, began murmuring. The narrative was subtly shifting. I wasn't just the guy with expensive cars being difficult. I was the guy calmly highlighting the Emperor's rather costly and increasingly threadbare new clothes. Patricia's obsession was becoming her weakness. She was so focused on defeating me that she failed seeing the bigger picture. She was bankrupting the association, alienating residents, and creating a mountain of evidence against herself, all while I was literally profiting from her mania. The beauty was the more she escalated, the stronger my position became. She was digging her own grave, and my company was happily billing her for the shovel, one impound at a time. The strain was clearly affecting Patricia. Her meticulously styled steel-grey fortress of hair seemed to have developed a slight lean, and the circles under her eyes were becoming more pronounced, even under her usual thick foundation layer. Her once confident declarations at association meetings now carried a desperate, almost frantic edge.
The other board members, a collection of mostly spineless sycophants and a couple of well-meaning but easily intimidated older residents, were starting to appear nervous whenever finances were discussed. Harold, the treasurer, looked perpetually on the verge of breakdown. According to Rick, Harold had made another panicked call, practically begging for a payment plan for the outstanding Tri-State invoices, which now totaled over $12,000. Rick had politely but firmly explained that our terms were net 30, and delinquency would result in service suspension and collections as per the contract Patricia had signed. The pressure was mounting on her, and I could see it. She started expressing her frustrations in petty ways. Our newspaper delivery suddenly started landing in the flower beds. We received an anonymous but clearly Patricia-authored complaint about the excessive height of grass in our backyard, which was invisible from the street. Our normally friendly mail carrier started giving us sympathetic, furtive glances like we were political dissidents in an authoritarian regime. The impounding continued, though, with slightly reduced frequency, as if even Patricia was beginning to sense the absurdity. Or perhaps the dwindling association funds were becoming a genuine constraint. The final impound before things truly spiraled out of control was for Marcus's Silverado. The infraction: possession of overly aggressive tire tread pattern deemed detrimental to the aesthetic harmony of pavement surfaces. I swear she must have spent nights with a thesaurus creating these. Once again I went through the routine. Call to Linda. Code Silverado. Aggressive treads, the usual. Then the visit to Patricia's. This time she didn't even bother with civility pretense. She practically snatched the check from my hand and slammed the door in my face after shoving the release form at me. She was unravelling. I almost felt a sliver of sympathy for her. Almost. The real breaking point, however, wasn't another impound. It was the quarterly association budget review meeting. This was a more significant affair than monthly meetings, usually sparsely attended, but word had spread about the association's financial troubles, specifically the colossal impound expenses.
The community room was packed. People were standing along walls. There was electricity in the air, a sense of anticipation. I sat in my usual back spot, my thick evidence binder resting innocuously on my lap. Harold, the treasurer, looking like he was facing execution, presented the budget.
When he reached the vehicle management services line item, a gasp went through the room. It was astronomical. Tens of thousands of dollars. Mr. Patterson's vehicles alone account for a significant portion of this, Harold mumbled, shooting a terrified look at Patricia, who sat rigidly straight, her face a mask of brittle defiance.
Are you suggesting, a brave resident near the front asked, that one resident is responsible for nearly bankrupting our association with parking tickets? Patricia finally spoke, her voice high and strained. Mr. Patterson has shown consistent disregard for our community's rules and regulations. These actions were necessary to maintain order and uphold our standards. This was my moment. I calmly stood up. Mrs. Williams, I said, my voice steady and carrying clearly through the silent room, you say I've shown disregard for rules. Yet, every single time one of my vehicles was cited and impounded, I immediately paid the association's demanded fine and retrieved my vehicle. Did I not?
She stared at me, dumbfounded. Well, yes, but... And for each of these impounds, I continued, opening my binder to a neatly tabbed section. The association, under your specific authorization, contracted with a company called Tri-State Vehicle Recovery Services. Correct? I held up a copy of one of the earliest invoices showing her signature. They seem to be a very efficient, if rather expensive, recovery service. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Patricia looked like a cornered animal. That is the company we have a contract with. Yes, they provide excellent service. Indeed they do, I said, allowing a small, almost predatory smile. So excellent, in fact, that I became a co-owner of Tri-State Vehicle Recovery Services 4 years ago. The silence in the room was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the worn carpeting. Patricia's jaw literally dropped, her carefully constructed facade shattered, revealing pure, unadulterated shock and dawning horror.
Every time you ordered one of my cars impounded, Mrs. Williams, I explained calmly, you were directing association funds, our funds, the funds of everyone in this room, into my business. I paid your arbitrary fines to the association, and then the association paid my company a significantly larger amount for the impound. You were effectively subsidizing your personal vendetta against me with our collective money while inadvertently generating me a tidy profit in the process. I let that sink in. The residents were looking from me to Patricia, their expressions ranging from stunned disbelief to outright fury. Harold the treasurer looked like he might collapse. Patricia was white as a sheet. This is an outrage, she finally sputtered. A conflict of interest. You should have disclosed this.
Disclosed what, Patricia? I asked, my voice dangerously soft. That you were repeatedly and erroneously targeting my legally parked vehicles. That you were manufacturing violations from thin air. That you were wasting community funds on a personal crusade. My business dealings are my own. Your malfeasance as association president, however, is a matter of public record. I then laid out, piece by piece, the evidence, the photographs of legal parking, The ridiculous violations, copies of checks she'd cashed, and then the coup de grace, the stack of invoices from Tri-State to the association, all authorised by her, detailing every impound, every inflated charge she'd approved. The room erupted. People were shouting, calling for her resignation, demanding an audit. Patricia looked utterly broken, her reign of terror collapsing around her in real time. The meeting descended into chaos, but Patricia, it turned out, had one last desperate and incredibly stupid card to play. Later that night, fueled by what I can only imagine was a toxic cocktail of humiliation, rage, and sheer panic, she made her move. My security cameras, bless their high-definition hearts, captured everything. At 2:23 a.m., a shadowy figure easily identifiable by her distinctive steel-grey hair and the determined hunched gait I'd seen so many times, approached our driveway. It was Patricia.
In her hands she carried 2 gasoline containers and a lighter. The piercing shriek of our integrated smoke and motion alarm system jolted Jennifer and me from deep sleep. It wasn't just the house alarms, it was also an alert pushed to my phone from the external security system. Significant motion and thermal event detected. Driveway Zone 1.
My blood ran cold. I threw on clothes, heart pounding, and raced downstairs, Jennifer close behind me. The acrid smell of gasoline and burning paint hit me even before I reached the front window. Outside, our driveway was bathed in an orange glow. My beautiful green Lamborghini, Jennifer's beloved BMW, and Marcus's formidable Silverado were all engulfed in flames. It was a sickening, surreal sight, like something from a movie. The heat was intense even through the double-paned glass. For a moment I was just stunned, watching years of hard work and cherished possessions turn into smouldering wreckage. Then the rage hit me, cold and pure. This wasn't just vandalism. This was a violent, desperate act of a person completely unhinged.
Jennifer gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Marcos, who had come rushing down, just stood there speechless, his face a mask of disbelief and horror. "Call 911," I yelled, already heading for the back door that led to the garage where I kept a heavy-duty fire extinguisher, though I knew it would be woefully inadequate against a gasoline fire of that magnitude. As I fumbled with the extinguisher, my phone buzzed again. It was the security system automatically saving and uploading the footage from the preceding minutes. Even in the midst of the chaos, a grim sense of satisfaction flickered through me. She'd been caught red-handed, brilliantly, stupidly caught. The fire department and police arrived within minutes, their sirens wailing through the night, rousing the entire neighborhood. Lights flickered on in house after house. Neighbors, bleary-eyed and wrapped in robes, started to gather at a safe distance, their faces illuminated by the inferno in my driveway.
The firefighters attacked the blaze with professional efficiency, but the damage was already catastrophic. The Lamborghini was a melted, blackened shell, its iconic lines warped and twisted. The BMW and Silverado fared little better, paint blistered, interiors gutted by flames. As the police began their initial investigation, cordoning off the area and taking statements, I calmly walked over to the lead detective, a weary-looking man named Rodriguez. "Detective," I said, "I believe I have footage of the perpetrator." I showed him the video on my phone. The grainy night vision footage was chillingly clear. Patricia Williams, her face contorted in a grimace of fury, dousing the cars with gasoline, striking a lighter, and then scurrying away as the vehicles erupted into fireballs. There was no ambiguity, no room for doubt. Detective Rodriguez watched the footage twice, his expression hardening. "Martinez," he called over to a uniformed officer, "I think we need to pay a visit to Mrs. Williams down the street and bring an arson investigator." The delicious irony was not lost on me that less than 12 hours after her public humiliation at the association meeting, Patricia Williams was attempting to destroy the very evidence of her financial malfeasance, the cause that generated the impounds, and in doing so was creating irrefutable evidence of a far more serious crime. While the firefighters were dampening down the last embers and police were at Patricia's house, an entirely different drama was unfolding. My lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Rebecca, arrived. I'd called her as soon as I'd shown the police the footage. She surveyed the scene, took copious notes, and then turned to me. "Tom, apart from the obvious arson and destruction of property, did she make any other moves recently? Anything legal?" I almost laughed. As a matter of fact, Rebecca, yes. This morning before the fire I was served. Patricia, through the association's legal counsel, filed a lawsuit against me. Rebecca raised an eyebrow. For what precisely? Failure to pay outstanding association fines. The very fines I have cancelled checks to prove I paid. Harassment. And get this. Creating a hostile community environment because I own nice cars and apparently questioned her spending at the association meeting. Rebecca actually did laugh then. A short, sharp bark. Oh, this is beautiful. She's filed a frivolous lawsuit likely to try and intimidate you or as a smokescreen hours before committing felony arson. Her lawyer is going to have a conniption. We'll get this lawsuit dismissed so fast it'll leave a vapour trail. And then we countersue for malicious prosecution on top of everything else. The police returned from Patricia's. She was in custody, having apparently confessed after being confronted with the video evidence. The motive, according to the detective, was a mixture of rage over the association meeting, a desire to get back at me for exposing her, and a bizarre, delusional belief that if the cars were gone, the proof of her excessive impound authorizations would somehow also disappear. She genuinely seemed to believe she was the victim in all of this. The next few days were a blur of insurance adjusters, police statements, and meetings with Rebecca. The financial hit from the cars was significant, but thankfully I had excellent insurance with agreed upon value for the Lamborghini. The emotional toll on Jennifer and Marcus was harder to quantify. Seeing their vehicles destroyed so maliciously was deeply upsetting. Marcus in particular was heartbroken about his Silverado, but even through their distress there was a sense of vindication. Patricia's reign was definitively over.
The news of her arrest and the reason for it spread through Maple Ridge estates like wildfire. The association board collapsed. Harold the treasurer resigned immediately, citing stress. The other members followed suit, not wanting to be associated with the scandal. An emergency town hall was called, not by the association, but by concerned residents.
There, the full extent of Patricia's financial mismanagement, enabled by the impound scam I had inadvertently uncovered and profited from, was laid bare. The total sum she had funneled to my company, and thus to the association's detriment, was in the high five figures. My fines paid back to the association were a fraction of that. The remaining association funds were nearly depleted.
It was a mess, but it was a mess that was finally out in the open. The community, though shocked, was also energized. People who had long suffered silently under Patricia's tyranny were now speaking up, determined to rebuild their association on principles of transparency and common sense.
As for Patricia's lawsuit against me, Rebecca had it dismissed within a week. The judge practically laughed it out of court, especially when presented with the context of her subsequent arson arrest. Our countersuit was already in motion. Patricia Williams, the once feared queen of Maple Ridge Estates, was facing multiple felony charges and a mountain of civil litigation. Her meticulously controlled world had literally gone up in smoke thanks to her own incendiary ego, and I, the target of her bizarre obsession, was about to make sure she faced every last consequence. The legal battles that followed were, in their own way, as methodical and satisfying as the earlier stages of this saga. Patricia Williams, stripped of her association presidency and facing serious criminal charges, was a shadow of her former imperious self. Her expensive white Cadillac was probably being eyed by her legal team as a potential source of funds. Her trial for arson, vandalism, and insurance